save one for me.
You better wait, it may not be enough. You can share.
Oh, thank you. That was, yeah, that was for.
Oh, Victoria, sorry.
You're so quiet.
Yeah, I just had a stack of stuff and I pulled it all out. So today's verse starts with a piece of Matthew 6, and just to put that in perspective, Matthew 5 begins the Sermon on the Mount, and everyone thinks that once you get through the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount is done, but no. It goes all the way through Matthew 6 and 7 before you get done with what's called the Sermon on the Mount. So we're in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, and you probably also remember a verse from this chapter, something about the lilies of the field and clothing and don't worry and so on. But out of this mass of material, I picked one verse for us to think about self-leadership, and it's the Matthew 6:24 verse. So I'll read the verse and then read it silently, and then we'll read it collectively. No one can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Make your own silent reading. And now, in unison. No one can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Anyone see something new for them today in that verse?
For us personally or for people in general?
Just, did you see something new?
Yeah, because you struggle throughout as humans. In the very beginning, I don't know if I have to tell my history. Grew up in Sharon, no electricity, no, very rustic. So we were the basics. And my mother brought us up that she grew up in wealth. So she knew everything, but she wanted us to learn both sides. So she incorporated, my grandmother really educated us with the Bible, but my mother used that as she became Quaker, and rather than continuously going and being told at church, and seeing people, she'd say, okay, you have God, and how we used to use it, she said, years ago with nothing, was that you used it as a guidance tool. So you didn't have, but then as more technology came into play, and mining came in, and people dispersed to different countries, you then had this tearing of, okay, who do I follow? Because the drive of humankind is to go, and it becomes greed. You want and you want and you want, so then you don't have time. We get up and we all go down to our church. She would explain, every household had a church area. Not only did you go to the regular church in town, you had your own church, so every day you got up and you had church. Now we only come Sundays. So it's sort of like that, still that tearing piece. So for me, it's sort of like you have to learn every day to stop. You brush your teeth, you go to the bathroom, so automatically that becomes part of your life. So when does this come back in? So that's kind of how my mother would have explained it, and I see that as all the time you're always carrying it with you. You cannot have two. But it becomes that, and it's constantly a temptation to have that.
Yeah, very good. Others?
Well, it caused me to ask if there's some conflict between following God and how I make a living. I hope not. I'm not a lily of the field, and the grasses don't spin or sow, but we need to spin or sow to eat. So that was what the effect it had on me, was to ask me about, for me to ask myself about that, and I hope not. I guess the insight would be not that you go and work, but how do you go and work? What do you do? How do you conduct yourself? And certainly in what spirit do you conduct yourself?
Yeah, very good. What spirit do you conduct yourself? Because it's a struggle for some of us who don't have a job like Tom in the nonprofit sector, where whatever you do seems to be part of the work of God directly. But if you're doing computer work, where does that fit in?
Well, I'm going to have to put in a disclaimer. Not it being nonprofit work doesn't make it holy.
I know it's not holy. It's
We
direct.
do good things for people. On the other hand, it's a small group of people, relatively compared to the whole world, and we're trying to do good for this small group of people. That's okay, but it's not the whole world we're working at.
Sure.
What struck me is the opposition between God and wealth. And as Rose spoke, something that struck me, she mentioned going down into your church every day. I refocus and rededicate myself to wealth every day when I get up and put my clothes on that are appropriate for the business world, but I don't refocus and rededicate myself to God every day.
We'll come to that a little bit later. Good observation. The one that struck me was that it's not, it was a black and white. And the black and white was not just yes and no, it was strong. You desire, you despise, not it's okay, or we do a little of this and all that, we mix it all together. All the way over on the two edges. And that hit me today. Today we're talking about physical, spiritual, intellectual, and emotional health. Why did I pick this passage?
Because it's all in one.
All one.
It's your body, like you say, you drink water and you have to live with that. That's portion. But then so is this. You almost have to drink each and every one of aspect of your religion to keep going, because otherwise other portions, without you realizing, are deteriorating.
So do you take those four dimensions? If you apply that first passage to those four dimensions, do you know people who have made physical their only goal, intellectual their only goal, emotional their only goal? I know that may be a stretch, but think of Madonna. Right? She's made her life on emotion, as an example. Very interesting to consider the edges, and we'll try to consider the middle most of what we do today. I thought we'd close this early devotional with the other section of Matthew 6, and notice there'll be some very similar words in this, as well as some differences in this to what we say corporately as the Lord's Prayer. So let's just pray together. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And do not bring us to the time of trial, but rescue us from the evil one. For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. Interesting differences between the way it's said a little later on today and the way it's said in other places. So, last time you got together and you talked a little bit about leadership styles and communication styles. So, since I wasn't here, I need good quality, succinct reporting back on what did you learn about your leadership styles.
There was a video.
There was a video I couldn't watch. However, I did watch it. I was watching Disney TV, unfortunately.
We discussed the different leadership styles, and one thing we came up with was that authoritarian had its uses, that it wasn't altogether a negative thing. And I think people came to the same conclusion about the other leadership styles as well. They have their upside and their downside. If you are too participative, for example, you might never get anything done. On the other hand, if you don't allow participation, you don't have a team. So I think we kind of came to the conclusion that all of the styles had an upside and a downside, and that blending them was a good thing.
And each style also has a place. Different kinds of teams require different types of leadership. But a church volunteer team is going to more heavily depend on the, what was the middle one? The participation or the delegation, whereas the military has got to operate on the authoritarian.
Really?
No, I think it's all, but you may not see it.
Well, I'm not saying only, I'm saying
But
more
their main
strongly.
focus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I learned it, I'm sure when Victoria learned it, they talked about situational leadership, that there is a leadership style appropriate to situations, and fire, police, military combat would certainly benefit from the authoritarian style, that rather than perhaps a fully collaborative style, with forming a nominating committee to form a committee to study the problem, to give a report back. Probably wouldn't work in some of those extreme cases, but there are times when even in the military, collaborative style would be the appropriate style to be used.
I like the situational.
Yeah, but it's,
Yeah.
I think the easiest way to grasp it, and when I first learned it, I thought, well, yeah, this is kind of useful, and over the years I found it more and more useful, that there are times when you want to apply your leadership styles differently, based on the circumstance. But as I think you observe in church work, it tends to be in a fairly narrow band of situations where you do.
Well, wouldn't you say also the
styles.
administrative portion of ours is like what you're referring to is like the military? It has to be that way. You cannot just go willy-nilly and do it and be all, cozy and cozy. It's gotta be done. Otherwise, you're gonna fall apart. Then as you go into deeper areas, then it becomes more and less structure, or not less structure, but less firm, and
Yeah, that's where the
say-
situational.
yeah, and so then
aspect
you
comes
have,
in,
but then
right.
you can get lost within that, because if at a business, we just go into a business and look at every act, then after a while, you get kind of lost. Or each person or client that you're dealing with becomes lost, because that's the way you're coming at them, or the way you're leading them is not going to work in their situation.
Yeah, there's always a time when you try to balance consistency, meaning approaching every problem the same way, with effectiveness and the
Right.
situational style. So those things are indeed important. So today we're going to cover this second part of the self-awareness, or helping you become more aware of who you are as you participate in church leadership and leadership in other aspects of your life. And we're going to focus on the four aspects of that today: the physical, the intellectual, the spiritual, and the emotional. And now you know that any one of those is a 3-credit course at the undergraduate level and can lead to a doctoral thesis. So we're not going to go that deeply into each one, but we are going to approach each one so that we do understand it in enough depth. So, first one is physical self-leadership. Have you ever shown up at a task tired? Like maybe Sylvia this morning, having dealt with a less than 1-year-old all weekend, a little tired this morning. And when you're tired, you probably don't give it your best, or a lot of folks just find that that's not enough. There's not enough reserve for them to do that. So that's a daily preparation. I think that's going to be the theme today. That what you do to make yourself physically capable of being in leadership, even leadership at a committee level where all you do is talk, is about awareness and about physical presence, and it's about energy. So first, journaling question is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well have you done at managing the physical part of your life? I'm not going to ask for direct responses on what your numbers were, but rather, do you have something you would share with folks about managing the physical part of your life?
I would love to be able to exercise more. Always gets pushed to the side or something comes up. I
So
pull a
if I-
muscle in my
so-
neck, I'm still working through that, so.
So if part of this class I said drop and give me 20, which would be the authoritarian style from the last lesson, and combine that with the physical, that would be good for you? Maybe not.
Well,
But the notion of, you have a physical problem that's preventing you from doing some things, and you'd also like to have whatever the discipline is to keep you from getting into those physical problems. Any suggestions?
Self-management.
Self-management.
You have to have, it's time. We all, I mean, you're gonna always hear me refer, sorry, I apologize, but you refer, like, I think, the days are shortening, and you have to think about that. So when we lived without electricity, or without the rush of, okay, I gotta get up to a 9 to 5 job, my mother got up at the daybreak, and I'm like, what are you doing up? I'm still sleeping. But she was like, I have to have this time management. So she would write it out. So if you're gonna get up and you are physically, I'm overweight, so I physically have to say, okay, I'm getting older, it's raining out, and now, so you have to say, do I rush and end up late everywhere? Or do you physically make yourself get up 1 hour early, so then you know you have that hour to get yourself ready, emotionally, physically, mentally ready, so you're not tearing people's heads off halfway through because you're late, but they're not, you can't. So when you go to a job, you have to do that. Some people are really good getting up and jumping up and doing this. We ladies, I don't, but we get our makeup done, so you have to delegate what time you have to give children. You know, it's that mishap of why didn't you know, especially 2s and 3s. You can't tell them go get dressed, because they'll do something, but they're not going to get dressed. So then you have to have a lot of that time. So you physically are telling yourself, mentally almost at the same, but also physically, how much time does it take my body to get from here to here? And if I'm hurting, torn muscle, I'll do this. Take a look. Do I want more time in the hot shower or something, or stretching out, or doing my what-ifs? When I lived in Greece, they did that. The 90-year-olds were up at like 4 in the morning because they were doing their yoga and their stretching, and then they were in the ocean, wet tub. Doesn't matter how cold it was. They were in the ocean doing their time. Then by the time we got up and were out, they were already gone.
So a daily routine is really the answer, and the daily routine would include the aspects that you need to work on a daily basis. You may not need to work on an emotional component every day, but you may need to work on a physical component every day, and that's the one you would appropriate time to. Does anybody have a bad example? I love the second question. Time when you have seen leadership fail as a result of poor physical preparation, physical self-leadership.
Well, I can certainly, I recall Labor Day weekend a year ago, doing 3 consecutive 16-hour days at a conference. And by the 3rd day, I assure you, my leadership, to whatever extent, but whatever quality it is, was badly eroded. Because I'd been on for 2 full days, 16-hour days, and going into a 3rd one. And there really wasn't enough time to sleep, and there wasn't any downtime. And that part of me that's the introvert had no time to go anywhere and recharge. I was on all day, all out for 3 consecutive days. And by that 3rd day, you know, all I was thinking about was, when is this going to be over? When is this going to be over?
So we're glad Carol's still alive after that event.
Yeah, well, even if I'd been of an evil, truly evil nature, I wouldn't have had the energy to do anything bad to it. But, you know, stuff like that comes up, and I guess that's where this other aspect comes in. You know, how physically fit are you? What state are you in when you start that 3 days?
Yeah, good example. So we can all imagine examples where we've had those things. And want to dwell so much on the physical aspect today. I want to spend, I think, most of the time on the spiritual aspect, which is the next one. And, spiritual self-leadership is really the notion of centering. I think Rose did a nice job explaining, where she's centered and how she became centered that way, and told well in advance her story. Didn't know that the question number 2 was going to be, what is your story? There at the start of the spiritual self-leadership. But we all have a story, all been on a journey as far as what we do and how we do it and why we're involved in the church. And I commend that to your journaling exercise. I don't want us to go through everyone's story in here. Not that that wouldn't be valuable, but I think we would spend a lot of time doing that. I want to spend some time on the second one. What practices in the spiritual dimension keep you growing? Are the things you do regularly that are helpful to developing your spiritual dimension? John?
I think serving others to me is prayer and serving others, and trying to always be mindful of who is providing for us, which is God, and what's the way that you can give back. You can serve other people. You can do other things for other people, even in the smallest way of just encouraging somebody that you meet, or greeting them, or setting a positive example. And that's just to go back, see if I can summarize my comments on some of the things that have already been said. Coming out of a military background, I immediately, when I was 18, went to the Coast Guard Academy and was subjected to drop and give me 25. So you had that negative, and I still think we've gone a little bit too far over the line for positive reinforcement with today's generation. And there's something to be said for the show up on time or drop and give me 25 aspect of leadership as a bottom line thing. But what do people serve today? And I said so many people today serve wealth. They think about it, we see it, we live in that as we look around, or how many people go home from here and go, oh, my house, it doesn't look good. What will the neighbors think? How will I have to spend money to paint my house, not because I'll get wet if it rots. It's because the appearance committee in my neighborhood, in our town full of covenants, is going to get down on me. Because so we serve wealth. Oh, look at my car. My fancy car is dirty. I need to. Well, I have a fancy car in the first place.
Yeah.
So-
It'll rain tomorrow. It'll rain tomorrow.
Right. So that's that kind of thing. Think about serving others. What can I do to help others rather than help myself? And then to go back to the leadership component of the different styles of intellectual leadership. When you're doing that, I think over the years the military, in my experience, has evolved to be more situational and gone from when I came in, it was much more dominated by what I called my dad, the old-time white guy, greatest generation, red style of leadership. I'm right, you're wrong, do it my way because I'm the leader, versus the blue collaborative or the green analytical style of leadership, which you can change situationally according to what you need. And the military now, the guys over in Afghanistan sit down and talk about what are we going to do on patrol before they go out, so that the sergeant or the captain, when they run into a situation, knows that they will react in that authoritative style because they've collaborated beforehand.
So
And that's
mixture of styles.
right, and that's what's going on. And so there's a lot of that going on. But that whole process of what are we doing to help others? What can we? It says, what areas of your spiritual life could you use some freshening up or a new challenge? I think my ability to keep thinking about that is the thing that I love about Presbyterianism. Is I always say that we're really not, look, I'm not gonna preach at you, I'm just gonna show you the Christian way. And so we are doers of the word and not just speakers and hearers of the word. And I really love that. And so that I constantly have to remind myself to practice that.
So it took in a very different direction than I thought. When you talked about practices, you talked about servant leadership, which is both a physical component as well as a spiritual
Right.
component. Merging the first two together. I like that. What I expected to hear was, what are your daily spiritual disciplines? I expected to hear an answer on that.
Well, I think to take off from him, it is sort of like that. I mean, you do have the old fashioned where we were brought up, where you are told you do it, because you were trusted in that leader, your parent, because they must have all this wisdom, you know. But then how do you learn? Because then you get out and you're, you know, shot out the door at age 18 going, well, now I should know it too, but I don't remember that class. So then where do you every day say, okay, what do I use today? How do I use this? And that's where I guess my question was, you know, you have that, but then you have your own. Like I say, I want to become a leader. Everyone says, oh, you're a born leader. I'm like, I don't know how to do it. I'm just doing it. But then how do you now turn it into this? How do I bring this out to somebody who doesn't know? How do I bring it out to a posh woman in his environment that all she knows how to do is to get her nails done and stuff? But I want to spiritually kind of guide her through that and do a little bit more. How do I bring it down to the downtown where they're on the streets and they don't have time to be listening to me going, well, today no, lady, we're hungry. But no, there's more to it. How do I teach you? Because now there's so much involved. Like you said, they have time. Well, if a bomb comes in at that one moment you're having your meeting, was there any preparation before that? You know, that was where you every day already have that within you.
So do people have specific things they do every day that they call spiritual practice?
Yeah, Craig, I'm gonna jump in, if that's all right. One of my goals is to always have some kind of devotional time. And I found that I had even, this last job I had before I started Red Hat, I was just up, I had to be up at 4 o'clock in the morning to set up training rooms and traveling till late at night, and so that time kind of quickly eroded. But one of the things that I do is I actually have a devotional delivered to my inbox every day. So if I do nothing else, if I don't get any other time, I know that I've at least read one email from God every day, spoken through the word of somebody else. And so I think we actually, did we put up some of those?
We will.
We've talked about doing
Which one do
that.
you use?
I actually use 365 devotions. But the other thing that I found is if you're a Facebook junkie, and I'm not, but I have to be sort of because I have kids that are, and I need to monitor that. But Jody often puts up a devotional every morning on Facebook. So again, if you're looking for that kind of short path nonetheless, to getting some kind of spiritual nourishment, there are many places. Also, I subscribe on Facebook to Frederick Buechner's site, and he actually puts up a really nice devotional every day as well. And he actually uses passages from several of his books, which is good because I've read a lot of them, but it's a good refresher to remember what I've read.
It was nice to see one of his comments on one of our Kirk's Facebook.
Yes,
pages
he did,
recently.
yeah.
But can I ask a question? I guess I'm going back to where I'm trying to learn. I'm a good survivor, I guess that's what it is, and I want to learn the leadership. But how do you leadership that if, let's say hypothetically, everything goes down, turn off the lights right now and say, it's down, now are you going to lead me? How are you going to lead me through this when he's saying, okay, spiritually, I'm going to lead you? Well, the lights are off, I can't see. So,
No,
as a
Rose,
leader.
let me
Okay.
tilt this so you understand the question. The question is, how do you prepare yourself spiritually so you can be a leader?
That is what my point is.
Okay.
The point is that spiritually, I get up every day and I could say, I'm only hungry. I'm not spiritually going to think about spirit. I'm I'm gonna be cynical, I'm gonna be rude, I'm gonna be like, I'm gonna steal this today, I've gotta do this, I'm gonna go think about that. So now every day as a Christian woman, I need to say, okay, how do I? My mother taught you, you do it throughout your whole life, every day. You brush your teeth, you're thinking about that. You're going to the kitchen, you're gonna cook, you're gonna think, thank God I have this, thank God I have this, or why do we have this? Because she did that every day when we ate. It wasn't, oh, I was lucky because mom went to Walmart today versus the Piggly Wiggly. It was my mom went out and dug out some food. And so if we have onions, it's because she went out there in the pouring rain and got the onion. So every day, but how do we as leaders teach somebody who, like she said, she doesn't have time, so she's reading something. How do I spiritually encourage her as a student to remember every day as an individual throughout your life? And I guess that's what I'm saying. Every day when you do something, I'm looking at it and going, well, thankfully we were able to do this now because other people started out with, charcoal or something.
Well, the hierarchic needs that people have are always going to be centered around survival first and the higher order things second. So if you have someone who's worried about survival, water, food, sleep, safety,
Shelter.
they're not going anywhere beyond that until all those are satisfied. Now, if you're doing ministry to someone who's in that very lowest tier of those needs, then, as you're saying, pointing out as appropriate, not constantly, because we all, I think, rebel against those who want to preach first and serve second. So you're working your message in while you're meeting that person's needs and helping them grow. But this is about how do you grow personally so that you can do that, not how do you do that.
I think dig deeper into the Bible.
Yeah.
The devotional for me is, I'm sort of in that borderline way of, yeah, it's easy to turn on the computer now, but how? You're giving me this statement, but how? He has the Bible open and it's explaining, it's teaching him. But I'm going to miss all of that when I just read a phrase and go, oh, that's nice. Are you going to get Starbucks night now? We don't, but how do we, not spiritually?
There are multiple levels. One
Right.
level is, one just hears something that's a nugget. The second level, and I think that's where Victoria was talking, is these daily devotionals provide you with not just a word, but a word in exegesis. And over the course of a year or two of doing that, you do get the equivalent of reading that Bible with all its notes cover to cover. But most people are daunted by starting at the beginning of that book and working their way through. So how do you get into that? How do you develop those spiritual muscles to be able to do that? These are not the only answers. They are one set of answers.
So one thing I did for a period of time is I would listen to an audio version of the Bible, the New Testament specifically, from start to finish. I did that most of the first part of this year, I believe. And I would, as I walked around the neighborhood, as I ran, as I drove into the office, whatever, anytime I had spare time, I would listen to the next verse, the next chapter. And that's, I've continued to draw energy from that throughout this year.
Very good. So using idle time or even time when you're doing other tasks that are physical to have a spiritual component through an audio Bible.
Yeah, and if I was doing something that was taking my mental energy away as that was on, I would go back and redo that chapter. But it's easy to do that when it's an audio version. Just read it again.
That's how I did the Bible in 90 days. That was my morning podcast. Because I listened in the morning, every morning, rather than trying to figure out how to pronounce Jehoshaphat, which was always a challenge.
Well, and just one more that I was thinking about is at first I used to think that my devotions had to be from the hardest translations of the Bible, where I would have to spend all of this time kind of deciphering what I read. And so as I've gotten older, I guess I've relied more on translations like The Message, Eugene Peterson's The Message, and things that are written in more plain English to kind of give me the spiritual food I need, and then a way to actually put my faith into action, as opposed to, when I was younger, reading the King James Version or reading the original RSV, and you're kind of like, you know, when I went to Sunday school way back before the Earth's crust cooled, you know, they said, they handed us an RSV, this is the Bible that you use, and, you know, and trying to figure out what's actually being said. So, so yeah, I like the idea of audio, but when I did Bible in 90 Days, I used the message and made my stick-to-itiveness much higher percentage.
A Presbyterian pastor out on the West Coast decided to paraphrase the Bible in modern language. So it's not translation, so you won't find it line by line, but it is the essence as interpreted by Eugene Peterson. And it's a darn good interpretation. Very, very readable, very straightforward. So he tries to take the nuance of the language from ancient times in another language and convey that in today's modern English in colloquial language. So you'll see, get out of there.
Yeah.
It won't be, won't be some highfalutin word. It'll just be, get out of there, stop it. Very direct.
No truly I tell yous.
Yeah.
No, verily, none of those.
No,
Yep.
it would be more listen up,
Yeah.
right? Instead of verily, I say to you, it's listen up.
Can I say one more thing?
Sure can.
I'm a sporadic prayer. I ought to be an everyday prayer because I think there's a lot in it. But I'll have to say that a sermon we had a few weeks back was very telling to me. It was about honesty in prayer. If prayer is part of your spiritual discipline and it's something you aspire to do every day, then I think honesty in prayer is a wonderful thing to remember. I think we get so much stress when we're growing up. You were talking about Sunday school and all that on reverence in prayer. Well, reverence is important. We hope we all feel it. But I think it would be an okay prayer to say, God, today I'm just not really feeling it. I'm not feeling connected. I'm not getting it, but can you help me with that? I think that's a very good prayer. And I'll just throw that out. I think my prayer would be less sporadic if I could remind myself to be honest about it and not think so much about, am I in a reverent mood today for prayer and thanksgiving and worship. If we're taught God as a person, and you can speak to God as a person and say, today I'm not connecting. I'm feeling alienated or angry or preoccupied or something, and be honest about that. And I think that could be the basis for a good prayer and help with this spiritual discipline of trying to do something every day and thereby put on the armor of God.
Very good. You may have noticed, and I think it was Kevin who said, there is a way to do a little bit of a number of these disciplines all at once. So don't forget that you may be able to take some mundane parts of your day and use a sense not involved in that mundane part to advantage, so you can merge physical and spiritual together without too much difficulty using today's audio technology. I want to go a little bit backward from audio technology to what Richard Foster identified as the spiritual disciplines. Richard Foster, well-known writer about spirituality, and he identified 3 categories of disciplines, and they are inward, outward, and corporate. So it's not just as simple as one might do it personally. The inward disciplines are meditation, prayer, fasting, and study. Meditation, prayer, fasting, and study. The outward disciplines are simplicity, we've already touched on that once, solitude, submission, and service. So you notice we're covering a lot of these topics just in our discussions of the way we approach these disciplines personally.
Those back again.
Simplicity,
solitude,
solitude, submission, and service. And the final set of disciplines are corporate disciplines: confession, worship, guidance, and celebration. His book is called The Celebration of Discipline, and that was never two words I would put together, celebration and discipline. But he finishes, I like that, corporate discipline finishing with the notion of celebration. You see there in your journaling entries that you have some time you could look at your challenges personally and those things that you would freshen up. And then also people who have mentored or discipled you. Sometimes the best example is someone you could emulate as you look around and see what others have done. So let's move on to intellectual self-leadership. The notion that if you stop learning, you're probably not as effective a leader. And you want to think through those sets of things you need to learn twofold. One, to increase the other dimensions, but two, obviously, to learn about those things you might like to learn more about. So, for example, Rose saying, I'd like to learn how to lead here. Well, maybe one of your intellectual disciplines is to find some leadership books that you would come and approach in a disciplined way to increase your leadership skills by learning from both spiritual leaders and other leaders. And if you didn't know where to start, the Harvard Business Review has a podcast on leadership.
Yeah, but I think that's what I'm saying, is I'm trying to get away from, you can get so many masters, but when are you going to get the actual hands-on deal? When are you going to get that wisdom? The experience comes from somebody that if I sit down and interview you through your history, how do I learn from you? It's like the Buddhism, you get that. So they go to the Buddhist and they say, okay, teach me. The Buddhist doesn't turn around and go, okay, go home and go www.buddhism. You do the nitty gritty hard and dirt. So then when you go to turn around and become a leader yourself, you can then say, I think that's so much of our world today. Everybody wants to spew out, statistics, but where'd you get that? Did you go down the trench? Did you get all that? So that's what I'm coming to the church for. I've done all the sitting at home. I want to now hear from you. I'm going to put you in the spot and say, how do you make you sweat and say, okay, what did you do today? Well, he just said, well, he had it, he didn't do very well in his opinion. But at the same time, to me, it sounded great because you at least made a connection with God. You said something. It was heartfelt. That to me is the leadership. That was important.
And that's
on the web, it would have said something else. Spend 5 minutes here, 10 minutes here, and then close with this. Well, now we're back to the time.
there's multiple dimensions to every piece of learning.
Right.
One piece of learning is experiential.
Right.
But it's only one piece.
Right, absolutely.
So we're not always going to spend all our time on experiential leadership.
No, I understand.
So on the intellectual side, you notice it starts off, the first question is, what are your passions? Right? Not what are your duties, what are your responsibilities, but what are your passions? What is that is really the thing that you want to do most? And then intellectually, what skills do you need to acquire to do those? And as Rose says, how do you go about acquiring them, both from various sources, but also from the wisdom of individuals and their stories? And we've got about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to just do this quickly. The next question was, what have you learned lately? And I think we all have said something that we've learned lately as we went around the table sharing today. And what are you curious about? That's a hard question. That's a journaling question for you on where you want to learn something, and then how do you go about learning that would be the plan you can put in place as your intellectual discipline.
Is that another way to say what are you passionate about, or can you differentiate those two if they're different?
I can be curious about the Higgs boson. I'm not passionate about it. So I make that simple distinction. That there are things I like to learn about, but they're not maybe what I'm passionate about. However, for Dr. Higgs, it was his passion, right? And that's why it ended up being named after him.
So in the context of this question, is it more broad question, what are you curious about? Or are you really asking, are you reiterating what are you passionate about?
I think I'm a little playful on that question. That you want to make make sure you focus on your passions, but the curiosity will be where the joy comes in, and where those two intersect. I don't ever expect the Higgs boson to intersect much with what I do as a church leader, but there may be other things I'm curious about that do. For example, the people who do the computer networks, right? They're curious about computer, and that's their passion and therefore also their ministry. So that Rich would merge all those together.
So, to drive that to a point, are you saying you should focus on the things you're curious about, that also, the subset of the things you're curious about that you can also have passion in, so that the energy's there? And
I've turned it around. I would say you focus on what you're passionate about, and your curiosity is to dovetail with it. So you're passionate about ecology, and that turned into a program of the community garden, right? So that was taking things you were curious about and you're passionate about, thrown together and turned into a ministry, with unintended consequences, of course. And that's really what we hope to get out of ministry teams, is those passions that people have, maybe curiosities, but mostly passions, turn into ministries with unintended consequences. Lastly was emotional intelligence, and I am low on the scale of intellectual knowledge on emotional intelligence. I'll let you know that. But the questions are pretty simple as far as emotional intelligence goes. And that is the leadership component that is desired to be focused on here is being in touch with your emotions, learning how to recognize your own emotions, if necessary, controlling your own emotions where that's appropriate. He uses the word manage more than control, meaning you don't squash emotions that are relevant to what's going on. Sometimes passionate anger is an important emotion, and I think you wouldn't have found the people committed to Moral Monday as they were without some passionate emotionality. They would not let go, right? They didn't say, I can control that. They said, I need to manage it. I need to get it to find an outlet. And I give you there in between the intellectual self-leadership and the final questions for home study, a place to go look at what an emotionally healthy church might look like.
Would you say emotion is almost similar to like the realistic means?
To me, emotional means anger, joy, called passion, but the very primitive emotions, and recognizing those in yourself and being self-aware is the first step. And the second step is noticing that I'm angry, Kevin's happy, why the heck is that? Why is there such dissonance there? And learning as a leader to manage your side and to recognize his side. Next week when we do communications, we'll spend more time on what we see in others rather than what we see in ourselves. This is the component of what you see in yourself as far as recognizing your emotionality so you can be a more effective leader and not fly off the handle, the typical example.
And that's kind of the core of this whole area of emotional intelligence that's really only emerged in the last 10 or 15 years that people have been studying, because they've figured out that traits of really successful people, they somehow scored highly in that EI area rather than just pure IQ.
Correct. And I think if you think through your own personal life, there are times when you were blinded by your emotion, one way or another, maybe good, maybe bad. Generally it's bad, where you're just angry at something and you don't see what's in front of you. And I'll use the simplest example in auto mechanics. There are times when there's a bolt that's rusted on, and it just gets you angry as a mechanic. Instead of saying, it's just a thing. It has a solution of some sort. There are only 12 solutions. Just go apply one of the 12 solutions in sequence. It's not a big deal, but you try it, you strip the nut, you bang your knuckles, they start to bleed, and all of a sudden you're a bad mechanic. Nah, that's not what we're after. Not that I've ever done that. Thank you all for the participation today, and let's close with a prayer. conversation that help us learn and enrich the kingdom that you've given to us. This, for guidance during the week, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Ray, thank you for facilitating, keeping us on track, moving forward. Great job. Point of feedback here.
Yeah.
I felt like there was more meat on the bone here
There's, oh, God.
today.